Stephanus Johannes Paulus. Paul Kruger was one of the dominant political and military figures in 19th-century South Africa, and President of the South African Republic from 1883 to 1900. Nicknamed Oom Paul, he came to international prominence as the face of the Boer cause, that of the Transvaal and its neighbour the Orange Free State, against Britain, during the Second Boer War of 1899 to 1902. He has been called a personification of Afrikanerdom, and remains a controversial and divisive figure. Admirers venerate him as a tragic folk hero, while critics view him as the obstinate guardian of an unjust cause. Born in the Eastern Cape Colony, Kruger took part in the Great Trek as a child during the late 1830s. He had almost no education apart from the Bible and, through his interpretations of Scripture, believed the earth was flat. A protege of the Voortrekker leader Andries Pretorius, he witnessed the signing of the Sand River Convention with Britain in 1852 and over the next decade played a prominent role in the forging of the South African Republic, leading its commandos and resolving disputes between the rival Boer leaders and factions. In 1863 he was elected Commandant General, a post he held for a decade before he resigned soon after the election of President Thomas Francois Burgers. Kruger was appointed Vice President in 1877, shortly before the South African Republic was annexed by Britain as the Transvaal. Over the next 3 years he headed 2 deputations to London to try to have this overturned and became the leading figure in the movement to restore the South African Republic's independence, culminating in the Boers' victory in the First Boer War of 1880–81. Kruger served until 1883 as a member of an executive triumvirate, then was elected president. In 1884 he headed a 3rd deputation that brokered the London Convention, under which Britain recognized the South African Republic as a fully independent state. Following the influx of thousands of predominantly British settlers with the Witwatersrand gold rush of 1886, Uitlanders provided almost all of the South African Republic's tax revenues but lacked civic representation. Boer burghers retained control of the government. The Uitlander problem and the associated tensions with Britain dominated Kruger's attention for the rest of his presidency, to which he was re-elected in 1888, 1893 and 1898, and led to the Jameson Raid of 1895–96 and ultimately the Second Boer War. Kruger left for Europe as the war turned against the Boers in 1900 and spent the rest of his life in exile, refusing to return home following the British victory. After he died in Switzerland at the age of 78 in 1904, his body was returned to South Africa for a state funeral, and buried in the Heroes' Acre in Pretoria. Early life, family and childhood. Stephanus Johannes Paulus Kruger was born on 10 October 1825 at Bulhul, Cape Colony, the 3rd child and 2nd son of Caspar Jan Hendrik Kruger, a farmer, and his wife Elsie. The family was of Dutch-speaking Afrikaner background, of German, French Huguenot and Dutch stock. His paternal ancestors had been in South Africa since 1713, when Jacob Kruger, from Berlin, arrived in Cape Town as a 17-year-old soldier in the Dutch East India Company's service. Jacob's children dropped the umlaut from the family name, a common practice among South Africans of German origin, and over the following generations Kruger's paternal forebears moved into the interior. His mother's family, the Stens, had lived in South Africa since 1668 and were relatively affluent and cultured by Cape standards. Kruger's great-great-uncle Hermanus Steyn had been president of the self-declared Republic of Swellendam that revolted against company rule in 1795. Bullhull, Kruger's birthplace, was the Steyn family farm and had been Elsie's home since early childhood. Her father Douw Gerbrandt Steyn had settled there in 1809. Krugers and Steyns were acquainted, and Caspar occasionally visited Bullhoek as a young man. He and Elsie married in Cradock in 1820, when he was 18 and she was 14. A girl, Sophia, and a boy, Douw Gerbrandt, were born before Paul's arrival in 1825. The child's first two names, Stephanus Johannes, were chosen after his paternal grandfather, but rarely used. The provenance of the third name Paulus was to remain rather a mystery. Johannes Meintjes wrote in his 1974 biography of Kruger, and yet the boy was always called Paul. Paul Kruger was baptized at Cradock on the 19th of March 1826, and soon thereafter his parents acquired a farm of their own to the northwest Transvaal bank, near Girlsburg, in the remote northeast of the Cape Colony. His mother died when he was 8. Caspar soon remarried and had more children with his second wife, Hiltje. Beyond reading and writing, which he learned from relatives, Kruger's only education was 3 months under a traveling tutor, T. L. Munros, and Calvinist religious instruction from his father. In adulthood, Kruger would claim to have never read any book apart from the Bible. Great Trek in 1835, Caspar Kruger, his father and his brothers Gert and Theuns moved the families east and set up farms near the Caledon River, on the Cape Colony's far northeastern frontier. The Cape had been under British sovereignty since 1814, when the Netherlands ceded it to Britain with the Convention of London. Boer discontent with aspects of British rule, such as the institution of English as the sole official language and the abolition of slavery in 1834, led to the Great Trek, a mass migration by Dutch-speaking Voortrekkers northeast from the Cape to the land over the Orange and Vaal rivers. While many Boers had been voicing displeasure with the British Cape administration for some time, the Krugers were comparatively content. They had always cooperated with the British, and the abolition of slavery was irrelevant to them, as they did not own slaves. They had given little thought to the idea of leaving the Cape. A group of emigrants under Hendrik Potgieter passed through the Krugers' Caledon encampments in early 1836. Potgieter envisioned a Boer republic, with himself in a prominent role. He sufficiently impressed the Krugers that they joined his party of Voortrekkers. Kruger's father continued to give the children religious education in the Boer fashion during the trek, having them recite or write down biblical passages from memory each day after lunch and dinner. At stops along the journey, classrooms were improvised from reeds and grass, and the more educated emigrants took turns in teaching. The Voortrekkers faced competition for the area they were entering from Malikazi and his Indabella people, a recent offshoot from the Zulu kingdom to the southeast. On the 16th of October 1836, the 11-year-old Kruger took part in the Battle of Vegkop, where Potgieter's lager, a circle of wagons chained together, was unsuccessfully attacked by Malikazi and around 4,000–6,000 Matabele warriors. Kruger and the other small children assisted in tasks such as bullet casting, while the women and larger boys helped the fighting men, of whom there were about 40. Kruger could recall the battle in great detail and give a vivid account well into old age. During 1837 and 1838, Kruger's family was part of the Voortrekker group under Potgieter that trekked further east into Natal. Here they met the American missionary Daniel Lindley, who gave young Paul much spiritual invigoration. The Zulu king Dingaan concluded a land treaty with Potgieter, but then promptly reconsidered and massacred first Piet Retief's party of settlers, then others at Weenan. Kruger would recount his family's group coming under attack from Zulus soon after the Retief massacre, describing children pinioned to the mother's breasts by spears, or with the brains dashed out on wagon wheels, but God heard our prayer, he recalled, and we followed them and shot them down as they fled, until more of them were dead than those of us they had killed in their attack. I could shoot moderately well, for we lived, so to speak, among the game. These developments impelled the Krugers' return to the Highveld, where they took part in Podgwaiter's campaign that compelled Malikazi to move his people north across the Limpopo River, to what became Matabeleland. Kruger and his father thereupon settled at the foot of the Magaliesberg Mountains in the Transvaal. Meanwhile, in Natal, Andries Pretorius defeated more than 10,000 of Dingaan's Zulus at the Battle of Blood River on 16 December 1838, a date subsequently marked by the Boers as Dingaan's Dag, the Day of the Vow. Boer tradition of the time dictated that men were entitled to choose two 6,000-acre farms, one for crops and one for grazing, upon becoming enfranchised burghers at the age of 16. Kruger set up his home at Waterkloof, near Rustenburg in the Magaliesberg area. This concluded, he wasted little time in pursuing the hand of Maria du Plessis, the daughter of a fellow of Oortrekker south of the Vaal. She was only 14 years old when they married in Potchefstroom in 1842. The same year Kruger was elected a deputy field cornet of singular honor at 17. Mimcha's comments. This role combined the civilian duties of a local magistrate with a military rank equivalent to that of a junior commissioned officer. Kruger was already an accomplished frontiersman, horseman and guerrilla fighter. In addition to his native Dutch, he could speak basic English and several African languages, some fluently. He had shot a lion for the first time while still a boy. In old age he recalled being 14, but Mimcha suggests he may have been as young as 11. During his many hunting excursions he was nearly killed on several occasions. In 1845, while he was hunting rhinoceros along the Steelport River, his 4-pounder elephant gun exploded in his hands and blew off most of his left thumb. Kruger wrapped the wound in a handkerchief and retreated to camp, where he treated it with turpentine. He refused calls to have the hand amputated by a doctor, and instead cut off the remains of the injured thumb himself with a pocket knife. When gangrenous marks appeared up to his shoulder, he placed the hand in the stomach of a freshly killed goat, a traditional Boer remedy. He considered this a success. When it came to the turn of the second goat, my hand was already easier and the danger much less. The wound took over half a year to heal, but he did not wait that long to start hunting again. Britain annexed the Oortrekker's short-lived Natalia Republic in 1843 as the colony of Natal. Pretorius briefly led Boer resistance to this, but before long most of the Boers in Natal had trekked back northwest to the area around the Orange and Vaal rivers. In 1845 Kruger was a member of Podgwaiter's expedition to Delagoa Bay in Mozambique to negotiate a frontier with Portugal. The Lebombo Mountains were settled upon as the border between Boer and Portuguese lands. After Maria and the first child died of fever in January 1846, Kruger married her cousin Gesina du Plessis from the Colesberg area. In 1847, the first child, Caspar Jan Hendrik, was born on the 22nd of December that year. Concerned by the exodus of so many whites from the Cape and Natal, and taking the view that they remained British subjects, the British governor Sir Harry Smith in 1848 annexed the area between the Orange and Vaal rivers as the Orange River Sovereignty. A Boer commando led by Pretorius against this was defeated by Smith at the Battle of Boom Pla. Pretorius also lived in the Magaliesberg Mountains and often hosted the young Kruger, who greatly admired the elder man's resolve, sophistication and piety. A warm relationship developed. Kruger's political awareness can be dated from 1850, Meintjes writes, and it was in no small measure given to him by Pretorius. Like Pretorius, Kruger wanted to centralize the emigrants under a single authority and win British recognition for this as an independent state. This last point was not due to hostility to Britain. Neither Pretorius nor Kruger was particularly anti-British, but because they perceived the emigrants' unity as under threat if the Cape administration continued to regard them as British subjects. The British resident in the Orange River area, Henry Douglas Warden, advised Smith in 1851 that he thought a compromise should be attempted with Pretorius. Smith sent representatives to meet him at the Sand River. Kruger, aged 26, accompanied Pretorius and on 17 January 1852 was present at the conclusion of the Sand River Convention, under which Britain recognized the emigrant farmers in the Transvaal, the Zuid-Afrikaanse Republic. They called themselves as independent. In exchange for the Boers' pledge not to introduce slavery in the Transvaal, the British agreed not to ally with any colored nations there. Kruger's uncle Gert was also present. His father Caspar would have been as well had he not been ill. Field Cornet, the Boers and the local Swana and Bassa chiefdoms were in near constant conflict, mainly over land. Kruger was elected Field Cornet of his district in 1852, and in August that year he took part in the Battle of Dimor, a raid against the Swana chief Sechel. The Boer commando was headed by Pretorius, but in practice he did not take much part as he was suffering from dropsy. Kruger narrowly escaped death twice. First a piece of shrapnel hit him in the head but only knocked him out. Then later a Swana bullet swiped across his chest, tearing his jacket without wounding him. The commando wrecked David Livingstone's mission station at Collabeng, destroying his medicines and books. Livingstone was away at the time. Kruger's version of the story was that the Boers found an armory and a workshop for repairing firearms in Livingstone's house and, interpreting this as a breach of Britain's promise at the Sand River not to arm tribal chiefs, confiscated them. Whatever the truth, Livingstone wrote about the Boers in strongly condemnatory terms thereafter, depicting them as mindless barbarians. One charge leveled by Livingstone and many others against the Boers was that when attacking tribal settlements they abducted women and children and took them home as slaves. The Boer argument was that these were not slaves but inburkelings, indentured apprentices who, having lost their families, were given bed, board and training in a Boer household until reaching adulthood. Modern scholarship widely dismisses this as a ruse to create inexpensive labor while avoiding overt slavery. Gesina Kruger had an inburkling maid for whom she eventually arranged marriage, paying her dowry. Having been promoted to the rank of lieutenant, Kruger formed part of a commando sent against the chief Montshilwa in December 1852 to recover some stolen cattle. Pretoria was still sick, and only nominally in command. 7 months later, on the 23rd of July 1853, Pretorius died, aged 54. Just before the end he sent for Kruger, but the young man arrived too late. Meintjes comments that Pretorius was perhaps the first person to recognize that behind rough exterior was a most singular person with an intellect, all the more remarkable for being almost entirely self-developed.